And actually, to be fair, I just mentioned Islam, but at the time, Islam was the only one of the religions that I never researched at that time. But what happened was I had a bit of a situation, and I don't know if I don't know if I want to tell this story actually. Sorry, gonna have to cut that out. I don't know if I want to tell this story, and I just started. I feel that's a bit weird. That's a bit weird. Should I tell the story? I don't know. You don't know the story, and I'm asking you, should I tell the story? Okay, I'm gonna tell the story. Yeah, I've always believed in God. Growing up as a child, well, I came from a Christian background. I say Christian background. My parents christened us. I was christened as a baby, and my nan was religious. She was very religious. She used to take us to church on Sundays. But my mum and dad, per se, they didn't really go to church. It wasn't really their thing, not unless it was some kind of religious event, i.e. Easter, Christmas, that kind of thing. But I did, as far as I'm concerned, I had my own relationship with God. So from a young age, I always used to pray at night time. Not always, but I would often pray at night time. I was taught the Lord's Prayer as a child, so I would recite that, and then I would just have a conversation with God. And especially if it was a situation where I know I'd done something, for example, that parent wasn't pleased with, or something that I felt bad about, and I'd have a conversation and sometimes be begging God to just, forgive me and I won't do it again. Just make sure everything goes right. Inshallah. But yeah, I always believed in God. And I pretty much had a journey around between the age of 17 and 25 when I had my son, which was of me discovering my own relationship with Allah. There are a few things that influenced me becoming Muslim, to be honest. So where I was at in my life at the time, I was in a relationship which was a long-term relationship with the father of my children, and I'd always kind of like been a truth seeker anyway, especially because of like I said, I had that relationship with God. But I've always been a critical thinker, so I've always been the one to kind of ask questions outside the box. So at the time, the relationship that I was in was very volatile. It was very, like, there was a lot going on. And I was using, I suppose, the internet as a distraction from things that were going on in the house. So I was doing a lot of research. I was getting my head into a lot of like researching what's happening in the world, what's going on in the world, why, I suppose I was kind of like down the rabbit hole and doing the whole searching up the Illuminati and that kind of thing. And that kind of led me to then start looking at religions, because I came to the conclusion that all of this stuff's happening, it's out of our control. But I believe in God, so there's something else. What else is there here? And I kind of was like, I didn't go to church. So I said to myself, I don't really want to go back to church. I don't really believe in Christianity like that, because I never really felt like Jesus was the Son of God. I never felt like that was the truth. So I kind of started to look at other religions just to find out, well, these people are into this, they're into Buddhism, they're into Hinduism, they're into, Sikhism, they're into Islam. What are these religions about? What's the differences? So I started to do that research. And actually, to be fair, I just mentioned Islam, but at the time, Islam was the only one of the religions that I never researched at that time. But what happened was I had a bit of a situation, and I don't know if I know. I don't know if I want to tell this story actually. Sorry, gonna have to cut that out. I don't know if I want to tell this story, and I just started. I feel that's a bit weird. That's a bit weird. Should I tell the story? I don't know. You don't know the story, and I'm asking you, should I tell the story? Okay, I'm gonna tell the story. So I had a bit of a situation. Where the relationship that I was in at the time had me very low. So I was at my lowest, the lowest that I've ever been in my life. And this was not just, this was, you know, now at this age and with the experience that I have in my life, I can look back and say it wasn't just the relationship at the time that was the cause of that, I suppose, depression that I was going through. There was so much more, and that was from childhood. But at the time, what was a focus was what was happening in the relationship. There was a lot of cheating, there was a lot of lying, there was a lot of me being called paranoid, there was a lot of deception, a lot of narcissistic behaviour. And at the time, what it had done to me was it had made me so low that I was contemplating suicide. And there was this particular day that I was so upset. I think I'd been crying for like the whole morning. My head was hurting, my body was aching. And my children, the two oldest, because I've got 3 children, so the 2 oldest were in the front room and they were playing, and I could just hear them in the background playing. And the sound of them playing was the only thing that was consoling me. I took myself out of the bedroom, out of the bed, and I went into the front room so that I could be near them, because the thoughts that were going through my head at the time were, I couldn't combat them, and that was the only thing that I knew would stop me from actually carrying out with the thoughts that I was having. So I went into the front room and I just sat in their presence, and they didn't even realise. They were so engrossed in their playing and watching the telly and whatever not, they didn't even realise that I was crying. I don't know if they did, but I didn't notice that they noticed that I was crying. And I wasn't crying out loud anyway, I was crying to myself. So I kind of sat on the chair, and at that time I just sat down and I literally went inside myself, and I was pleading with, at the time obviously God, but I'll say Allah now, in my head. And I was saying, please, I need something, I need your help, I need some relief, something right now, because I don't know what to do. And at that moment, I kind of had my eyes closed, but the window, I remember the window was sort of on my left here, and the sun had passed across the window, but the warmth from the sun at that moment was just, it's like it was just beating through the window, and I could just feel the warmth of the sun, and it just felt like Allah had moved the sun in the way of the window to say, like, as a sign for me to just know that everything's going to be fine. I just felt in my heart that Allah was telling me, you're going to be fine. It's almost like I could hear Allah saying, you're going to be fine. You're going to be absolutely fine. I'm here. I've always been here. So I felt this feeling of peace and this feeling of relief come over me. And then I just called the children, just called them over. And they was like, what's wrong, Mum? Because obviously at that moment they noticed. And I was like, nothing. And I just hugged them. I was like, I just wanted them to be in that moment with me. And yeah, so that was the turning point for me. And I think from there, I started to seek the truth. And I met a friend about 2 weeks later. I met up with a friend just out of the blue. Obviously, everything's Qadar Allah. But I just happened to be going to visit another friend, and this friend, I hadn't seen her for about 6 years. So she's getting out of her car, but I didn't notice her because she was fully covered in, you know, head to toe in black, and she had on a niqab. And she called me. She called my government name. She called me, and then I've turned around and I've looked at the sister, and I'm looking at her confused, like, hi. She was like, it's Stephanie. She said her name. It's me. And I was like, oh my gosh. So then from that moment, we started to connect. I was doing hair. She had 4 daughters. She asked me if I could come and do her daughter's hair and do her hair. So every time I went round to her house, she was giving me dawah. She was asking me questions and she was talking to me about Islam. And yeah, so eventually I ended up taking my Shahada with her. So the day I took my Shahada, so at this point, she'd given me a Quran, a small Quran, and she'd told me to take it home and to read it. And she'd said to me, she'd given me some instructions on what to do. She didn't tell me to make wudu, but she said to me to have a bath. Obviously, she probably thought it's a bit much for me to explain to you to make wudu and whatever not. So she told me to have a bath and that I should just read this little book. So when I took the book, I took it home and I put it on my bedside table and I put it by my lamp and I said to myself, yeah, I'm going to read that. And then it was there for about a week before I decided that I was going to read it, maybe a bit longer than that. But when I did eventually decide to read it, I opened up the Quran. First of all, I realised that the book's back to front. So I opened it up and then started to read what I now know is Al-Fatiha. At the time, I didn't know what it was. But I know that I read that first page and I just felt like this is too much. This is a lot. I'm not ready for this book. And I just put it down. I was like, I'm gonna have to come back to that because I don't know, when I read Al-Fatiha, I felt some kind of, it just felt powerful and it just felt like I'm being spoken to immediately as soon as I read that page. So I just said to myself, yeah, I don't think, I'm not ready for this yet. I'm not ready for this yet. I have to take this seriously. I'm going to put it down. I'm going to come back to it. And that night I had a dream. I had this dream. And in this dream, I'm lying on my bed and I'm looking at the ceiling and there was this ball of light that came out of the ceiling. It emerged out of the ceiling. And this is in the dream. I'm lying on the bed looking at this ball of light floating down from the ceiling and I'm looking at it and saying, what is that? That's really pretty. That's interesting. And it's just floating down really slowly and then it just floated down and it just burst and emerged. It just kind of like immersed my whole body full of light. And I remember waking up the next morning and I sort of had this overpowering feeling of peace. I had that in the dream as well, sorry. I literally had that immediately as the light kind of like just immersed itself through my body. I had this feeling of peace. And I remember waking up and feeling that feeling and then reflecting and remembering the dream. And I'm saying to myself, no, but that dream was actually a movie. I remember there was a whole lot of other stuff that went on, but I can't remember what happened and I can only remember that part. So then I remember I had a phone call with the sister that I mentioned. I think it was about a day later. And I mentioned the dream to her and she was like, sis, that's the Nur. That's the Nur of Islam. Sis, no, I'm going to call the Imam. I'm going to call him. I'm going to speak to him. I'm going to tell him about your dream. And then she did. She went and she came back and she said, yeah, he said that's the Nur. Sis, you're going to have to take your Shahada, you know. And she was just on it from there. She was just on to me. So we had made an arrangement that same Friday I would go around and I would do her hair and her daughter's hair. And I remember before I went to see her, I went to see the other friend that I knew that lived in the same building. And I was there next door and I said to my other friend, she thinks I'm going to take my Shahada, you know. I don't know what she thinks this is. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. Allah knows best. So anyway, I went to do her hair and she put on this video. I don't know if you remember it. It's The Purpose of Life by Khalid Yasin. So she put that on, the first part, mind you, because obviously it's very long documentary. And, not documentary, sorry. It's a very long talk. So she put that on and I remember watching it and literally just being completely in awe, like, okay, that was a lot. Got to the end of it and she said, so what do you think? And then we started having a conversation. So I'm asking her questions and she's answering the questions. And then I asked her one particular question and she couldn't answer it. And at the time, her husband was getting ready for Jummah in the bedroom. So she went to ask him the question and he just came to the hallway and he basically spoke to me from the hallway. Couldn't see him, obviously, so he was speaking to me from the hallway. But from then, for the next 2 hours, he missed Jummah and was speaking to me from the hallway and giving me dawah. And then got to the end of the conversation, or we got to a point in the conversation where he was like, so sis, do you actually have any more questions? Because, you know, you've answered all these questions and it sounds to me like you believe, you know, you believe in the message of Islam. And I was like, yeah, but I don't really know. He's like, well, you know, you should just take your Shahada because you don't know what can happen tomorrow. You don't know if you'll even be here tomorrow, if you're going to even wake up. So I did. I took my Shahada in the house with him and my friend. And I became Muslim. After that experience, the feelings subsided anyway. I don't remember or recall having the thought again after that day when that incident happened, when I felt like Allah was talking to me or giving me, you know, that comfort. And after I took my Shahada, the only thing that I felt immediately after taking my Shahada was that I'd finally done something right for the first time in my life. That's the only thing that I could think. This feels like I've done something right for the first time in my life. And from there onwards, it's just been a journey. Very much, you know, undoing what was done and changing habits and becoming who Allah wants me to be, not who I want to be. So my first Ramadan after I took the Shahada was it was just under a year, because I think I'd taken my Shahada just after Ramadan at the time. So it was just under a year. And by that time, by the time it was Ramadan, my first Ramadan, I was now pregnant with my third child, because I was still in the relationship from Jahiliyyah. And obviously I'm a new Muslim, so I'm still learning stuff. And I had hopes that, you know, my children's father would have taken his Shahada as well, and he would have become Muslim and we could have got married. So yeah, that first Ramadan was almost a year, just under a year after I took my Shahada, and by that time I was pregnant. So I was going into Ramadan with a lot of mixed feelings. My most distinct memory from my first Ramadan is that I actually left my children's father for the sake of Allah. During the last 10 days, I actually stopped that relationship and left. And I did it fi sabilillah. And actually, I'd tried to leave so many times in the past before becoming Muslim, and it hadn't worked. But this time I made dua. I made dua and I asked Allah to help me. I asked Allah to make it easy for me. And Allah did. He made it so easy. And when I came back to my house, he'd gone, he'd taken his stuff and he'd left. And I changed the locks, and then the rest is pretty much history. I think that first Ramadan was difficult for several reasons. Obviously, I was pregnant. Obviously, I was going through that situation. It was the first Ramadan. It was the first time I was fasting. So, you know, as a new Muslim, you want to do everything perfect. You want to get everything right. You want to do, you know, so it feels like when you can't achieve this, you feel just like a failure. And I remember feeling that, like that, when it got to Eid, I just felt very much like I'd failed Ramadan because I wasn't able to complete the Ramadan the way that I wanted to, the way that I would have liked to, the way that I should have, as far as I was concerned. But it was again, it's a learning process, because I was new to Islam. I'm changing habits. I'm changing things that I've been doing, like a whole mindset that I've had for years. Habits that I've had for years. This is not just something that changes overnight. But as humans, we're hard on ourselves. You know, we're hard on ourselves. We expect sometimes a bit too much of ourselves, and we don't give ourselves the compassion that we would necessarily give to someone else. So I kind of had to, it took me a while to recognise that about myself. And in regards to Ramadan, fasting it's never been something that's been easy for me. But I'd say the last three, at least the last 3 Ramadans have been easier, just simply because in the lead up, my preparation is making the intention and asking Allah for the help to make it easier. Making that intention and having tawakkul in Allah that Allah's going to make Ramadan easy for me, the fasting easy and everything else, you know, the extra ibadah, standing up in the night for Taraweeh, all of these things. Because it's not easy to do as a new Muslim. In the past, I didn't have a lot of support, but to be fair, that was partly my fault anyway. I had the support of a few sisters, but that was because I've always been somebody to keep my circle very small, and especially when it comes to women. Coming from Jahiliyyah, I haven't had very good experiences of having close friendships with a lot of women, and I just have a handful of people around me and my children. So when it came to, you know, talking to people and being social at Islamic events, I wasn't that person. I'd be very much, you know, in the corner and keep myself to myself. So over the years, that's been something that I've had to change. I've had to learn to adapt that. I've had to learn to kind of break that cycle. And this last few years, definitely, alhamdulillah, Allah's increased that circle of sisters for me. Like the sisterhood that is around me at the moment, I definitely feel like has been a blessing from Allah, that Allah's given me that support, alhamdulillah. So what I would advise new Muslims for Ramadan is to just pace yourself. A lot of people will say, write lists, you know, write yourself a list of all the things that you want to do. That list that you write can end up having like 15 to 20 different things on there. And you have to be realistic with your time, with your lifestyle, with this new change that you've made. You have to be realistic. Less is more. So there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he mentions that Allah loves for the believers to do things that, you know, do small but regular deeds. And that makes sense. Less is more. Just, you know, don't put so much pressure on yourself to do this, this and this. Just do one thing, even if it's one thing a day, even if you're just reading one ayah of Quran. I know everybody wants, you know, the idea is that we should read the whole Quran throughout the month of Ramadan. That was one of my issues, that I never ever got to read the whole Quran. But I'm happy even if I just read one ayah a day, because at least I've read some. And I know definitely if that's more than I've been doing for the rest of the year, then alhamdulillah, you know. I think the advice that I would give to born Muslims for reverts or convert Muslims during Ramadan is to be welcoming, be inviting. A lot of reverts are spending Ramadan by themselves because they come from families where they're non-Muslim, you know, non-Muslim background, and a lot of the time their families don't understand the change that they've made. They don't want to understand, and so they feel kind of ostracized. They feel ostracized from their family, but they're not quite yet, you know, submerged in the Muslim community, so they feel ostracized and they might not reach out. So they need the people to reach out to them, which is their fellow Muslims, to reach out to them, to offer them that solace that they need, that support that they need. it's easier said than done, because everybody's walking around with these issues of don't really necessarily, you know, talk to people outside their circle. It's, you know, coming outside your comfort zone. It's difficult for everyone. But that would be my advice. You know, if you see a sister or a brother in the masjid and you know that they're a revert, or whether they're a revert or not, they're by themselves, reach out, you know, give them salams and invite them to maybe sit down and read Quran with you, or do whatever it is that you're doing at the time, inshallah.